America is currently dealing with three major threats, but is it prepared for them? Gaza. Civilian casualties are rising as Israeli operations intensify. Iran. Intelligence indicates accelerated uranium enrichment beyond weapons-grade levels. China. Large-scale military exercises simulating blockade operations around Taiwan. Any one of these crises would fully occupy a normal presidency. But these are issues beyond a normal presidency, each independently increasing its influence. Here's what keeps strategic planners awake at night. These are not separate crises coincidentally occurring at the same time. They are interconnected challenges. Success or failure on one front directly affects America's capacity to manage the other two. When American resources flow toward Gaza and Iran, China is watching. When American attention focuses on the Taiwan Strait, Iran calculates. When American credibility is tested in the Middle East, allies in the Pacific take note. The question is not just which crisis poses the greatest threat to American interests. The question is which crisis, if mismanaged, makes the other two impossible to manage. Because in a three-front crisis, getting the priority wrong doesn't just cost one crisis, it can cost all three. So ask yourself, if America had to choose, and increasingly we do have to choose, where would you place your bet? Which front matters most for American security, prosperity, and influence over the next decade? Welcome to Crisis Zone. Today, we are not just analyzing three separate crises. We are examining how these crises integrate into the most complex strategic challenge America has faced since the height of the Cold War. Gaza front, the moral trap with strategic consequences. Gaza is not just about Gaza. It never has been. The current conflict represents something far more dangerous for American interests, a moral crisis that becomes a strategic trap. Here's the trap. America's relationship with Israel requires automatic involvement in any Gaza crisis. But that involvement comes with costs that extend beyond the Middle East. Every civilian casualty associated with American-supplied weapons damages America's relationships with Arab allies, Muslim populations worldwide, and younger Americans increasingly questioning unconditional support for Israeli policies. But the Gaza crisis also creates more immediate strategic costs. The greater America's focus on Gaza-Israel issues, the harder it becomes to address other problems. Consider the economic dimensions. Gaza operations require American intelligence support, logistical coordination, and diplomatic cover. But they do not threaten America's core economic interests. The Gaza Strip lacks significant natural resources, major trade routes, or critical infrastructure affecting global commerce. Compare this to the economic impacts of Iran and China scenarios. A nuclear Iran threatens Persian Gulf oil flows, which still represent 20% of global supply. A Chinese blockade of Taiwan threatens semiconductor production that powers everything from smartphones to military systems. Gaza threatens moral credibility. Iran and China threaten material prosperity. The Gaza crisis also reveals an uncomfortable truth about American strategic culture. We are better at managing military challenges than moral challenges. American forces can conduct precision strikes, provide intelligence support, and coordinate complex operations. But they cannot resolve fundamental questions about civilian casualties, proportional response, and competing claims to moral authority. This creates a strategic mismatch. Iran front. The nuclear clock keeps ticking. While attention focuses on Gaza, Iran's nuclear program has not paused for the news cycle. According to International Atomic Energy Agency reports, Iran now possesses enough enriched uranium for multiple nuclear weapons. The only remaining barrier is weaponization, the engineering process that turns enriched uranium into deliverable nuclear devices. Intelligence estimates vary, but most assessments indicate that Iran has between 6 months and 2 years to complete weaponization if it chooses to sprint toward nuclear capability. That timeline fundamentally distinguishes Iran from Gaza or China. Gaza is a crisis of choice. The current conflict could end tomorrow if political leaders chose different policies. China is a crisis of trajectory. Tensions are rising, but military conflict remains avoidable. Iran is a crisis of physics. Nuclear technology follows predictable timelines regardless of political preferences. What makes the Iran front uniquely dangerous is that it combines the urgency of a ticking clock with the consequences of nuclear weapons. Every month of diplomatic delay brings Iran closer to nuclear capability. The economic implications extend beyond the Middle East. Iran sits beside the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of global oil flows. A nuclear Iran does not need to use nuclear weapons to affect global energy markets. The mere threat of nuclear escalation in the Persian Gulf could send oil prices to levels triggering a global recession. But there is a deeper strategic problem. A nuclear-armed Iran fundamentally changes Middle Eastern power balances in ways that affect American interests worldwide. Saudi Arabia has already indicated it would pursue its own nuclear program if Iran acquires nuclear weapons. Turkey, Egypt, and other regional powers would face similar pressures. American military options to prevent Iranian nuclear weapons exist, but all are bad options. Airstrikes could delay the program by a few years while guaranteeing Iran's rapid and secret rebuilding. A ground invasion is militarily possible but would require hundreds of thousands of troops, years of occupation, and costs that make Iraq and Afghanistan appear manageable. Diplomatic options are not much better. Sanctions have failed to stop Iranian nuclear progress for over a decade. Negotiations have produced temporary agreements that Iran eventually abandons when political conditions change. Economic incentives only work if Iran values economic development more than nuclear weapons, a behavior Iran consistently contradicts. The time factor makes the situation even worse. Gaza crises can simmer for years without fundamentally altering regional power balances. Tensions with China can be managed through long-term competitive strategies. But nuclear proliferation follows physical timelines. Enriched uranium does not wait for diplomatic agreements. Iran also represents something that Gaza and China do not, a direct challenge to the nuclear non-proliferation regime that has prevented nuclear war for 80 years. If Iran acquires nuclear weapons, the precedent encourages every regional power facing security threats to pursue nuclear options. The result is a world with 20 or 30 nuclear powers instead of the current 9, a world where nuclear conflict becomes statistically inevitable. China front, the long game becomes the short game. China represents the most complex and consequential challenge among the three fronts because it operates across multiple timelines simultaneously. The immediate Taiwan crisis, intermediate technology competition, and long-term struggle for global influence, all happening at once, all requiring different American responses. U.S. intelligence assessments, reported in multiple sources, suggest Chinese leaders view the current period as a strategic opportunity. America is distracted by Middle East crises, European allies are focused on Ukraine, and China's military modernization has reached a point where Taiwan operations are militarily feasible. The Taiwan scenario produces immediate economic consequences that overshadow anything Gaza or Iran could create. Taiwan produces over 60% of global semiconductors and more than 90% of the most advanced chips that power everything from smartphones to missile guidance systems. A Chinese blockade of Taiwan would disrupt global supply chains within weeks. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan would disrupt them for years. But the China challenge goes deeper than Taiwan. China is the only competitor with the economic scale to challenge American global influence across every sector: military, technological, economic, and diplomatic. Iran can threaten Middle Eastern stability, and Gaza can test American moral leadership, but neither can provide alternative global leadership structures. China can. Consider the numbers. China's economy is roughly 70% the size of America's and growing faster. Chinese military spending has tripled over the past decade. China has become the largest trading partner for more countries than America has. These trends may not lead directly to conflict, but they create a world where American preferences matter less than they have since World War II. The technological dimension makes the situation particularly dangerous. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, advanced manufacturing, space capabilities. China's progress in these areas affects American security regardless of political relationships. Technology competition, unlike military competition, is not optional. Markets and innovation networks create automatic engagement whether policymakers like it or not. China is leveraging the Gaza crisis to strengthen its relationship with Iran and exploit it as much as possible. The economic tools available against China are also more complex than military tools. Tariffs, sanctions, and export controls affect American consumers and businesses as much as they affect Chinese interests. Technology restrictions slow Chinese progress, but also limit American access to Chinese markets and supply chains. What makes China uniquely dangerous is this: it is the only challenge among the three capable of fundamentally altering America's global position. Gaza operations, even if mishandled, do not change America's role as a global superpower. Iranian nuclear weapons, even if developed, do not eliminate American military advantages. But a successful Chinese challenge to American technological leadership, economic influence, and alliance structures could create a multipolar world in which America becomes first among equals rather than a global hegemon. Economic impact analysis. Which crisis hits your wallet first? Gaza operations cost American taxpayers roughly $3.8 billion annually in military aid to Israel, plus additional costs for intelligence support and diplomatic engagement. That's real money, but a small fraction of federal spending and has no immediate effect on American consumer prices, employment levels, or economic growth. By contrast, Iran's sanctions remove roughly 1.5 million barrels of Iranian oil per day from global markets. Under normal conditions, this puts upward pressure on energy prices, adding roughly 15 to 20 cents per gallon to American gas prices. If Iran achieves nuclear weapons and regional conflicts escalate, energy disruptions could be far more severe. China trade represents something entirely different in scale and scope. Total China-US trade exceeds $750 billion annually. China supplies critical components for industries from automotive to electronics to pharmaceuticals. A disruption in China trade does not just affect specific prices, it affects the entire structure of American supply chains. Employment effects follow similar patterns. Gaza operations create jobs in defense industries but affect relatively few American workers. An Iran crisis creates jobs in domestic energy production while eliminating jobs in sectors dependent on cheap oil. A China crisis affects millions of American jobs in trade-dependent sectors while potentially creating jobs in domestic manufacturing. China-type disruptions require supply chain preparation, alternative sources for critical goods, reduced dependence on just-in-time delivery systems, and increased inventory of items that could become scarce or expensive. Timeline differences matter for economic planning. Gaza crisis costs are predictable and budgetable. You can estimate increased defense spending and plan accordingly. Iran crisis costs are sudden but sector-specific. Energy prices spike quickly, while other sectors remain stable. China crisis costs are gradual but comprehensive. Prices rise across multiple sectors over months or years. The Federal Reserve has tools to manage normal economic disruptions, but these tools become less effective when multiple sectors are affected simultaneously. Interest rate adjustments can cool demand-driven inflation but cannot solve supply shortages caused by international conflicts. Military resource allocation. The zero-sum reality. America has the world's largest military, but even the largest military faces resource constraints when managing three simultaneous challenges. Ships deployed to the Mediterranean for Gaza support cannot be used for Pacific operations. Intelligence assets focused on monitoring Iran's nuclear program cannot simultaneously track Chinese military developments. Special operations forces engaged in the Middle East cannot prepare for Taiwan scenarios. Current American force deployments reveal these trade-offs clearly. The Mediterranean has seen increased naval presence since October 7, 2 aircraft carrier groups plus additional surface combatants. This represents roughly 15,000 sailors and Marines, along with associated air assets, logistics support, and command structures. Pacific force levels remain stable but stretched. The permanent deployment of approximately 80,000 American military personnel in Japan, South Korea, and other Pacific locations provides deterrent capability against China. But those forces face increased readiness requirements as Chinese military activity around Taiwan intensifies. Middle Eastern operations require about 30,000 American personnel distributed across Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, and other locations. These forces provide intelligence gathering, logistics support, and rapid response capability for Iran-related contingencies, but they also represent resources unavailable for other theaters. But resource constraints go beyond personnel numbers. Advanced weapons systems, precision missiles, stealth aircraft, satellite assets, exist in limited quantities. Using these systems for Gaza operations depletes the inventory available for Iran deterrence or China conflict. Manufacturing timelines for replacement systems are measured in years. Strategic priority assessment, the hierarchy of threats. Based on timeline urgency, resource requirements, and strategic consequences, here is how these three crises rank in order of priority for American strategic planning. Priority 1, China. This may surprise those focused on immediate Middle Eastern violence, but China represents the only challenge capable of fundamentally altering America's global position. The combination of economic scale, military modernization, technological advancement, and territorial ambitions creates a comprehensive challenge requiring a holistic response. Most importantly, China is currently the only country capable of competing with America for global leadership, and it is crucial for America to focus on this issue. Priority 2, Iran. If Iran acquires nuclear weapons and increases its power in the Middle East, it will weaken America's dominance in the region in the coming years and create economic challenges as well. Priority 3, Gaza. This prioritization is not a moral judgment about civilian casualties or Palestinian suffering. Both are extremely important. But from a strategic resource allocation perspective, Gaza represents significant but non-existential challenges for American interests. What this means for Americans. These strategic priorities translate into practical realities for American households, even if most people do not immediately see the connections. The resource allocation choices policymakers make today affect your economic opportunities, your security environment, and your children's future for decades. If China receives strategic priority, expect increased focus on technology competition, reshoring manufacturing, and alliance building in the Pacific. This creates opportunities in American manufacturing, technology development, and defense industries. At the same time, there are costs due to reduced access to cheap Chinese goods and increased defense spending. Your household experiences this through gradually higher prices for consumer electronics, clothing, and other Chinese-made products, partially offset by increased employment opportunities in American manufacturing sectors. Supply chains become more resilient but also more costly. If Iran receives strategic priority, expect increased military deployment in the Middle East, strengthened sanctions regimes, and potential military operations against Iranian nuclear facilities. This creates volatility in global energy markets and increases federal military spending. Your household feels this primarily through energy costs, higher gasoline prices, increased heating and cooling expenses, and transportation-related price increases affecting everything from groceries to online shopping. The effects are immediate but sector-specific. Conclusion: the choice America must make. Here's the uncomfortable truth: America cannot simultaneously maximize success on all three fronts. Resource constraints, attention limitations, and strategic trade-offs make perfect solutions impossible. The question is which imperfect solutions create the best long-term outcomes for American interests. Based on timeline urgency, strategic consequences, and resource requirements, China is the primary challenge, Iran is the most urgent challenge, and Gaza is the most visible challenge. Managing this priority structure while maintaining domestic political support requires clear communication about why long-term strategic competition matters more than immediate crisis response. If you found this analysis helpful for understanding how international events affect your daily life, subscribe to Crisis Zone and turn on notifications. Share this video with people who need to understand why distant crises matter for American prosperity and security. Because while we cannot control what happens in Gaza, Iran, or China, we can understand how these events shape the world our children will inherit. And that understanding is the first step toward making wise decisions in an increasingly dangerous world. Stay informed, stay prepared, and stay focused on what matters most for America's future.